and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan.
Welcome to Consider This, the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Let's start with news that there are 115 new COVID-19 cases today. That brings the total number of positive cases to 11,034. Now, out of the new cases, 11 cases have had a history of travelling to Sabah. So there was also a recent wave of COVID-19 cases that's included several shopping malls in the Klang Valley and one mall in Negeri Sembilan. Sharaad, how are you processing all this news? I mean, should we, the public, come to expect spikes like this in terms of COVID cases? I mean, is there really no need to panic if our systems are in place, if our SOPs, our procedures are all in place?
Yeah, I think there's always a good case for not panicking, except perhaps when we think that those in charge are a bit lax and not sort of keeping their eye on the ball. I do say, one thing I must say, Melissa, that this is a great time for journalism focus on health and, especially ones that are critical, not just following or processing government releases, but actually asking difficult questions. I think when it comes to, that image of people lingering at KLIA, for hours, unable, in fact, to do the very important things of social distancing and so on and so forth, then you need to ask yourself, what went wrong there? What was not thought through in this decision to have people tested at the airport returning from Sabah and not being given the space for social distancing?
Well, the question is, was it not anticipated, right? Could it have been anticipated? The question is whether we're truly practicing these physical distancing measures or if it's just purely cosmetic. We say, to keep the physical distancing, but when you do see those pictures of the crowded halls, crowded terminals, you wonder whether that was a lapse in terms of the system, in terms of our procedures.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there are two parts of it. The question of, kind of cosmetic social distancing practices. You see a lot of stickers on the ground saying people should keep to the left side of, an exit or an entry.
Right.
But then the thing about anticipating issues like people returning from, especially because, as we know, when people first perhaps made their bookings to go to Sabah, perhaps to vote, they did not know that these, rules about returning and quarantine were going to be put in place. So having introduced these new rules, which I think is fair enough considering how fluid the pandemic is and how responsive you want your public health officials to be, the question was anticipating the spaces that they would have to occupy, getting off that plane and then, in those corridors. I can't see how that could not have been thought through.
The other thing I wanted to bring up was also what happened, in the cases that we've seen in terms of the shopping malls. There was the controversy around the MySejahtera app. The Health Ministry has had to come out to clarify that MySejahtera lists COVID-19 hotspots in that tracker based on the source of infection. This is after thorough investigation by health authorities, and I think that came after several people were concerned about these new cases and wondering why it wasn't reflected immediately in the MySejahtera app. And I think that a lot of us have been quite diligent in scanning ourselves into the MySejahtera QR code at every entry point. But whether that is actually going to be working in the future to make sure that contact tracing is done and done well.
Yeah, I do wonder though, and just based on my own experiences, whether we take all that information on the app seriously enough, and that if there's an assessment might be a risky area to enter, do we then desist and not enter it, or do we just carry on as we would? So I think that all these new practices that are coming into play, and perhaps the curve in terms of learning is still a much more gradual one. Perhaps it should be steeper. We should go right up there and understand exactly what's happening.
And not be complacent. All right, let's take a quick look at other news. So Jalan Raja Laut 1, this is in KL, will now be known as Jalan Palestine. So the KL mayor said that renaming the road symbolizes Malaysia's support for the Palestinian people's struggle. Following which, we had the Federal Territories Minister, Anwar Musa, questioning DBKL's decision. He said that while he had no objections to having a road named Jalan Palestine, he wanted an explanation as to why a road named after a historical Malay figure was chosen to be replaced instead of a road with an English name like Jalan Stoner or Jalan Conley or Cochrane Road, right?
Yeah, so many wonderful issues here, Melissa, to be discussed. From why choose to change the name of a road? What does that gesture mean? Does it in fact mean the erasure of a previous history? Also, the question of this kind of anti-colonial attitude. That the history that's reflected in our colonial period is of less worth than the pre-colonial period, right, or any other period in our history. Yeah. And also, I think, what's brought up in much of social media is whether this gesture is kind of hollow, considering that when it comes to refugees at least, and of course the Palestinian issue is more than just a refugee issue, at least in the Malaysian situation, whether we've done enough for refugees in this country. Have we given them the right to work and be educated?
That's a very good point. I mean, whether this is a solidarity gesture without substance, and how do we make it of substance? I really do wonder in the conversations that we've had multiple conversations like this about renaming roads in the past. I think it could also be worth a conversation why we feel the need to rename our roads, and if renaming roads are the only way we honour history, we honour heritage, surely there can be other methods and other ways as well.
Yeah, there's also this other thing, Melissa, of course, is that people don't necessarily follow the new names, right? True. So I remember, Jalan 222, where I used to live, was renamed after the trade unionist P.P. Narayanan. We know that, when the late historian Professor Khoo Kay Kim died, almost immediately, again in my neighborhood, a road was renamed. Right. People won't necessarily pick up on these new names immediately, and often we, as denizens of cities, rely on our own personal relationship to roads. We'll just use the names that we're familiar with.
There are some practicalities, and also I wonder whether that might cause confusion in the short term. All right, we're going to take a quick break on Consider This, but after this we will turn our attention to Sabah and the lessons learnt from the very competitive elections there recently, as well as the ensuing wrangling within the winning coalition. That's all coming up in just a few minutes. Stay tuned.
Perang COVID-19 masih belum berakhir. Pastikan setiap langkah berjaga-jaga diamalkan, termasuk kebersihan tangan, pemakaian pelitup muka dan penjarakan sosial. Marilah kita sama-sama hapuskan virus ini sepenuhnya. Ayuh berdisiplin.
Seperti mana kita semua tahu, virus COVID-19 masih aktif. Sebagai peringatan, amalkanlah penjarakan sosial, kurangkanlah aktiviti kunjung-mengunjung. Keluar bila ada urusan penting sahaja. Kita semua mampu melakukannya dengan disiplin yang tinggi.
Perang COVID-19 masih belum berakhir. Pastikan kita sentiasa berdisiplin dalam mengelakkan 3S, iaitu kawasan yang sempit, sesak serta tidak sembang dalam jarak yang dekat. Mari kita sama-sama menjaga disiplin kita, hapus COVID-19.
Kita telah lakukan yang terbaik setakat ini. Tetapi perjuangan kita masih belum selesai. Kita perlu berhati-hati untuk menjaga keselamatan diri bersama-sama. Pakailah pelitup muka, cuci tangan dan bila di luar, jaga jarak yang selamat. Dalam melawan wabak ini, jangan ambil mudah dan jangan alpa.
COVID-19 masih belum berakhir. Pastikan setiap langkah berjaga-jaga diamalkan, termasuk kebersihan tangan, pemakaian pelitup muka dan penjarakan sosial. Marilah kita sama-sama hapuskan virus ini sepenuhnya. Ayuh berdisiplin.
Seperti mana kita semua tahu, virus COVID-19
Hi, you're watching Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris. With me is Sharaad Kuttan. Now, Sabah Governor Tun Johar Mahiruddin has confirmed that Sabah Perikatan Nasional Chief Datuk Seri Hajiji Noor will be sworn in tomorrow morning, and this after much wrangling among leaders within the Gabungan Rakyat Sabah Coalition. So, constitutional lawyer GK Ganesan joins us to look at the lessons that we have learned during these past few weeks. Good evening, Ganesan. Thank you so much for joining us on the show tonight. Now, many questions have been raised about our constitutional arrangements, especially the role of the governor, which has come into play recently. So firstly, when Musa Aman was released from 46 corruption charges, he led a revolt in the Sabah Assembly and claimed the right to form government. He was thwarted, however, when the governor, acting on the advice of the chief minister, dissolved the assembly. Musa then attempted to challenge this decision in court. Now, Ganesan, do you think that Musa Aman had a case worth hearing?
No, not one to start with.
And why is that, Ganesan?
Because you see, the person who is to be the chief minister, when someone has already been the chief minister, under Article 10, Clause 2 of the Sabah Constitution, it is the discretion of the governor to determine who is to be the chief minister. That's the first problem. The second problem is whether or not a person commands the majority of the state legislative assembly is a matter of some subjective debate. And there is in Article 6, Clause 3 of the Sabah Constitution, it's got to be someone who, in the judgment of the governor, likely to command the confidence of the majority. Now that is, of course, subject to a qualification later. We'll speak about this later when we deal with tomorrow's appointment. But I think he didn't have a case to start with. But there were other issues in relation to Musa Aman's applications. He had been away for a while, and there was a question that he had abandoned his post. So those were the 3 or 4 concepts that were in play during his case.
I mean, Ganesan, you know, most recently there were people lined up in front of the palace in Kota Kinabalu holding up placards accusing the governor of being power hungry. These are supporters of the man who now named as the incoming chief minister. Is there that kind of charge? How does it strike you? The idea that the governor might use his power in a way that is beyond the limits of those powers, or use it in a way to favor one party over another?
Well, I don't think the governor is entitled to favor the one party over the other. I don't think that's his job. And I think these are allegations over which I will not debate, because I will not enter into a debate, because I'm not particularly clear about what the facts were that were alleged against the governor. But I have a couple of things to say about what's going to happen tomorrow, if you're interested in listening to that.
Yes, please, go ahead.
Go ahead.
All right. So, under Article 6, Clause 3, the governor shall appoint as the chief minister a member of the Legislative Assembly who, in his judgment, is likely to command the confidence of a majority of the members of the Assembly. So there are 2 things here. First of all, it's a matter of impression to the governor, who in his judgment. That means it's a subjective judgment. The second subjective point is likely to command. Not necessarily in fact commands, but likely to command. So if he thinks he's going to appoint a chief minister who's going to be completely beset with leapfrogging supporters, then he may think that likely there is no confidence of the majority of the members on that person. But you might think that majority might mean at least 37 state legislative members, wouldn't you?
Yeah, in fact, Ganesan, wouldn't the governor be held to appoint the man just purely on the basis of numbers, not speculating about future possibilities in terms of the loyalties of those individuals, but just the numbers that have been garnered by, in this case, the Gabungan Rakyat Sabah?
You are absolutely right on the one part and absolutely incorrect on the other, and I'll try and explain why. There is a great riddle in the Sabah Constitution. That riddle is in a joint reading of Articles 6 Clause 3 and 6 Clause 7. I hope you're putting this up so that the viewers can see what it is. 6 Clause 3, as I said, has got 4 conditions. Majority must mean at least 37 legislative members must support the candidate who's wishing to be appointed as the chief minister. The second thing is that the governor must believe that he's likely to command that number. And the third condition is the candidate himself must be a member of the Legislative Assembly. And the fourth condition is the governor has a complete and unfettered discretion in appointing a chief minister, because that's what Article 10 sub-article 2 or clause 2 says. But there is a problem, and the problem is in a riddle, and that's only in Sabah. And that riddle is in Article 6 Clause 7, and it says this: for the purpose of Clause 3 of the article, where a political party has won a majority of the elected seats of the Legislative Assembly, the leader of such political party, who is a member of the Legislative Assembly, shall be a member of the Legislative Assembly who's likely to command the confidence of the majority. So remember, earlier I said that the governor has a discretion. Clause 7 absolutely removes that discretion. And there are 3 conditions in Clause 7 that speaks about this. And these are the 3 conditions that a CM candidate has to satisfy. First, he must be a member of the Legislative Assembly of Sabah. Second, that candidate must be a leader of a political party, and that party must have won a majority of the elected seats of the Legislative Assembly. Please concentrate on the pronoun and the letter A. It's the first alphabet of the English language. The Constitution doesn't speak of the party. It does not speak about the plural, the parties. It does not say a collection of parties. It's specific. It's unerringly pointing to the word a party. But that's not quite enough.
Right. Ganesan, if we could just sort of look at one of the other things that was played out in the media was the leaders of the GRS going to the governor and saying, you decide among us, because there were 2 contending leaders for the coalition wanting to be a chief minister. Was it the job of the governor to decide between Hajiji and Bung Mokhtar?
No. His job is to comply with the Constitution. I was about to finish it before he interrupted me, so let me finish it. So I said that's not quite enough, the 4 conditions, the 3 conditions. The third condition is the leader must be a leader of a party that has won a majority of the elected seats. So what is the meaning of the word majority? You might think it is 37, because 37 is the majority in an assembly of 73 seats. Wouldn't you agree? But in English, majority does not necessarily mean more than 50. It's a plain English word, and so far as the law is concerned, the dictionary meaning of the word majority quite simply means the greater number. So in law, the courts have always used the linguistic canons of constructions, and they will give an ordinary meaning to the word majority. So the judges are not supposed to rush into the dictionaries, and there's an old case, I believe it was in the year 2006, called DPP versus Smith, that deals with it. So let me now give you an example, Mr. Sharaad. Suppose there are 6 parties, parties A through F. Each party has 12 votes, that makes 72. Suppose party A has got 13. If I were to ask you, of the 6 parties, which party has the majority of the seats, what would you say? You would say party A, because it has got the majority of the seats. Therefore, it has got a numerical superiority, right, and it is the party, a party that has won the most number of seats. And therefore, tomorrow, if the governor does not name as chief minister a person who's got the greatest number of seats in so far as a single party goes, then his decision is liable to be challenged. Wow. And therefore, the governor has no discretion in it, because that discretion in Article 10.2 is removed by Article 6, Clause 7. Okay. And therefore, in my opinion, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Warisan has 29 seats, PN has 17 seats, BN has 14 seats, PBS has 7 seats, Independent has 3 seats, PKR has 2 seats, UPKO has 1 seat. So in plain English, which party has got the most number of seats? And who is the leader of that party?
Okay.
You know what the answer to that is.
Right. Ganesan, thank you so much for speaking with us tonight. It's time for us to take a quick break here on Consider This. We'll be right back with more. Stay tuned.
Kini berwajah baru.
Ini pula susulan khas pesawat Back Air di Kazakhstan. Pesawat berkenaan dilaporkan tergelincir 2 kali.
Notifikasi berita terkini dan navigasi mudah. Podcast dikemas kini dengan berita dan program.
Rebirth, Reformasi, Resistance and Hope.
Serta video tanpa had dengan scroll tanpa henti. Buat turun aplikasi baru Astro AWANI sekarang.
Bayangkan pagi anda dengan pandangan dan perbincangan luar kota. Berita dan isu semasa yang wajib anda ketahui sebelum anda...
Hi, thank you so much for staying with Sharaad and I on Consider This. Let's continue our conversation about Sabah post-elections. Joining us on the line now, we have Raheezal Shah Abdul Karim. He's a political analyst from UiTM Sabah. Good evening, Raheezal. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. Now the elections are over, the pick for Chief Minister has been announced, and I think comes now the next bit, governance, I would say. So, did the campaign, Raheezal, deepen divisions within Sabahan society? And looking at the history of Sabah politics, are we likely to see governance that furthers those divisions, or are we likely to see one that seeks to reconcile those differences?
Yes, thank you, Melisa. If we look at the campaign, during the campaign trail, the elections was fiercely fought by both parties. And I do agree with you. It seems that Sabahan is more divided than ever during these elections. In fact, more divided as compared with the last elections. But the good thing is the election result managed to produce, at least in terms of seat numbers, a clear winner, in this case GRS. So it's up to the new chief ministers, bearing that there's no changes up until tomorrow, because we all know that in Sabah politics, it's anything can happen every moment, every hour. But I think the major challenge for Hajiji is immediately would be the formations of cabinet. But before the formations of cabinet, I think the things that the both parties need to do, both for Hajiji and also for Shafi'i, I think it's especially on the part of Warisan, I've noticed that it's conspicuously missing any or lack of any concession statement or speech by top leadership of Warisan. I think as we move forward, as day goes by, I think it's good if we can hear sort of concession speech or
I understand that Shafi did speak earlier in the evening, yes, but let me just ask you about this. The last 24 hours has been really quite fraught with divisions within GRS. Do you think that even if there is, and it's speculated to be 3 deputy chief ministers plus the chief minister, that will settle things down, create the basis for stability, or will they be likely, and looking back at the history of Sabah, likely you see much more kind of fighting behind the scenes for contracts, for positions, for appointments. What is likely to happen?
Yes, you're right on that, Shad. Especially when it comes to the cabinet positions, I think. But my guess is, after intense fight among them as to who's going to be the chief ministers, my guess is a big numbers of the cabinet posts would go to UMNO. That is my guess. So that's among the reasons why they're willing to concede the chief ministership to Bersatu. But definitely, yes, there'll be a lot of factors that going to affect the unity of GRS. And remember, what happened at federal level also have direct impact towards the harmony within the GRS itself. So yes, it's going to be a tough battle ahead for them. But I think now the chief ministership questions have been put to rest. Then I think it's the next question would be the cabinet. Okay. But on the cabinet issues, I think they need also to incorporate Chinese leaderships into the cabinet. That's for sure. Because since independence until now, there's always a Chinese minister sitting in the cabinet. But now, if you look at the GRS, the assemblymen or assemblywomen, none of them are from the Chinese community. So luckily, there's 6 nominated assembly provisions that they can use to fill in this gap. Okay. But usually, what common in Sabah is the 3 DCM, Deputy Chief Minister, it's given to one Bumiputra Islam, one to the Chinese, and one to the KDM. But I bet in this case, it will go to the respective party, the 4 component parties, which is UMNO, STAR, and also PBS. Okay. So I don't know how, in terms of compositions, where do they can accommodate the Chinese representative.
That's quite interesting. I just want to come back to something that you said a bit earlier, Raheezal. You said that this is definitely going to have an impact to the coalition politics dynamic at a national level. Can you tell us a little bit about what lessons from Sabah should political players take away?
Well, there's a lot of lessons. There's a lot of takeaway that we can get from the result itself. In terms of the coalitions, you can see that the coalitions that was formed is a very loose coalitions. And what were being said within the coalitions in Sabah is reflect of what is happening in the federal level. I think all the conflict that we've seen among Bersatu, especially with UMNO, is as a result of what's happening with Bersatu and also UMNO at federal level. Now, let's hope that there won't be a change of government at federal level. If that is the case, then expect more realignment in terms of the alliance that is formed in Sabah to change, and it can change overnight. Right. So yes, it's quite fluid in terms of the coalition itself, but majority of the voters, majority of the Sabahan, what they hope now is for us to focus more on the economic issues, the COVID issues. Some people said to me that they miss those earlier months during the MCO where everybody was focusing about MCO when people will stop talking about politics. So right. Hopefully in the next few months, people will talk about politics, focus on the important issues.
Sure. Thank you so much for speaking with us tonight. We really appreciate your time. That's all we have for you on this episode of Consider This. But before we leave you tonight, I'd like to tell you a little bit about a webinar that Astro AWANI Link will be hosting this Wednesday. The discussion will be conducted in Tamil, and it's aimed to help the Indian SME community drive business in a COVID-19 stressed economic environment.
You can find more details of the Power Up webinar at link.astroawani.com.
All right, I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan, signing off for the evening.
Thank you so much for watching, folks. Good night.